Hello. Thanks everyone so much for coming. I am so honored to be here. This evening lecture series has played a real role in my own development as an artist. I've come to so many great lectures here, and I'll probably talk a little bit about that as I tell you about my history. So thanks again for having me, and I will start by just sharing a little Eileen Myles quote with you. Each scape is all its own place. No woman is like any other. I definitely relate to this. The idea of the scape or the landscape is a way in which I think about the body. Let's see. So in this talk, I'll talk about specifically the Breast Portrait Project, which is not the only body of work that I've done, but it's sort of come back and visited me over the years. And it's basically a portrait of just the torso in paint of women, trans, and gender nonconforming people. And it started in the late 90s, so it's been going on for quite a long time. And often people say, so what's your next project? And I've really been doing this project for such a long time, and it doesn't feel old to me, and I'll explain the history of it for those of you who don't know. And just to let you know, too, the sculpture in this photograph is from the New Bedford Art Museum show, and the sculpture is by Stacy Latt Savage. And this image is from Body Utopia, which I had the pleasure of organizing at Trestle Gallery in September to October of this year. And it was really wonderful to have a chance to reach out to artists whose work I relate to with the theme of the non-conforming body. So I invited Pinar Yola Khan, who takes photographs. Chitra Ganesh had a photograph. Sandra Perry had a video. Riva Lehrer had a drawing. And Konstantina Zavitsanos had a sculpture. And I found that I really learn so much from other artists' work and the connection I feel with their work. So this is Konstantina's, it's called Self-Portrait EMDR, and it's memory foam. She slept for 1 year on memory foam, and that's the shape that came from that. And she kind of put it within this frame. And an artist who I also admire very much, Jenny Dubnow, who's here tonight. I didn't know she was coming. She came to the show and she saw a connection between this piece and my paintings, and she said that it's kind of like coming out of the picture plane, kind of just bulging out. And that was really, really great for me to hear, because I've always just thought of, painting as a material surface or an illusionistic surface of depth. But I think what I am trying to do is really to create kind of something coming out of the picture plane. So this was the painting that she was referring to that was in Body Utopia. So it's about 58 inches tall and 76 inches wide, I think. And I think now I'm going to go back and just kind of tell you the history of how I got to be doing this work. This is a self-portrait I did in watercolor when I was 16. In 1987, there was a Lucian Freud retrospective at the Hirshhorn in Washington, D.C., and I went to it, and I realized that painting the figure could still yield something new. I loved the way, especially in his early paintings, he painted flesh. And I was very serious about being an artist at that time. Partly because I had a mentor, this man here, Carlo Pittore. He passed away in 2005. But in 1987, I spent some time with him. He lived in Maine. And he had lived and worked in New York for quite a while and then kind of retreated to Maine. This is one of his works. And he painted from life, and he painted the figure, and he often painted nudes. And he never gave me any feedback about my work except to do it. He gave me a really strong work ethic. And I think just spending time with him, I would go visit him, and every day I would draw from the same model that he was painting from. So I kind of just it's funny because I didn't think our work had anything in common, and recently I've realized that basically the foundation of the way I work with models and from life kind of came from him. And then he also kind of celebrated flesh a lot. I think his work is a lot like Alice Neal's, actually. But he definitely was very celebratory of the body. So then from 1987 to, about the next 10 years, when I started doing this project, I kind of just lived life. I didn't go to art school. I went to a high school for the arts. I went to Swarthmore College. I studied film. I got into activism. I came out as queer in 1990, which was very different than how it is today. I also kind of got interested in spirituality and feminism, and also feminist art and women artists, which also at that time, because of the fact that there was not the internet available, it was hard to find out about women artists even. Like, I really had to work hard to get a hold of things, and really all I could find was what books were available. So this picture is actually of a stranger that I took at I guess you could say a lesbian, feminist, separatist festival. And part of the thing that I did during this time was kind of come to a place of, I guess you could say, healing. And that's kind of what the project started from for me. I would go to a women's spirituality festival, or in this case, this was the Michigan Women's Music Festival, where a lot of the culture there is all about people kind of retreating from the patriarchy and sort of healing their bodies and celebrating themselves. So this is from a parade, and I just love this image because she looks so happy. And this is a wonderful Niki de Saint Phal piece. I actually got to visit this in Italy. It's part of her sculpture garden in Tuscany. And this is one of many pieces that are set on the hillside. This is basically a big house, and each breast is a room. So one of them is her bedroom, and one is her kitchen. So you can see the man there is standing and looking out of the central window in one of the breasts. And just that kind of permission and that audaciousness of feminist art also just became a big part of the way I wanted to work. So around this time, I started with just doing a self-portrait of my own torso, kind of as a healing exercise of some kind, just trying to kind of confront all of the kind of negative messages I had taken in about what it is to be a woman. And I found that it was actually kind of transformative. Like, I felt like I didn't look the way I thought I was supposed to, and I didn't look, I looked kind of dignified and just human. And my friends started asking for torso portraits, and then I started doing them at these festivals. And they have craft areas there, and they have tents, and I started offering them. And this is one of my early sitters. And back then, too, I think that breast cancer visibility was very different. So even at the Michigan Women's Music Festival, which is very feminist and very free, women who had had breast cancer felt kind of like they needed more affirmation and visibility. So this woman was the first person whose portrait I did who had had a mastectomy, and she then brought many more. And the system was they would buy the portrait, and then it took maybe 1 to 3 hours. I would take a picture of them, so I'd have a record, and then I'd ask them to write something, because I kind of, as a former sociology person, I was just always very interested in people's experience. So I had these blank journals. This was my sign that I had on my tent. It was very interesting working outside. And this was one of the first books that I had people write in. Very 90s, as you can see. And this is what the book looked like, just people writing in their handwriting after sitting, whatever they kind of wanted to say. So it was often the people who posed had a reason for wanting to pose. They had been through something, or they wanted to transform something about the way they felt about themselves. So they often used the experience of sitting as their own kind of transformative experience. And that was really interesting. I knew it had been that for me, but I didn't expect other people to experience it that way. So over the years, I've just done, not just at the festivals, also in my studio, portraits of over 500 different people and collected their writings. And I think there's something cathartic about not just that they were writing, but they were writing in this shared kind of journal, that they were becoming part of a book that included other people's experiences as well. And those portraits were pretty much all in pastel on paper because it's just quicker, and so this is an example of one of those. They took, like I said, about an hour to 3 hours, and it was nice because you could just do color, and it was almost like a painting. And I take inspiration, obviously, too, from ancient sculpture. This is a cycladic sculpture you guys might recognize from the Met. And I love the little roll of fat on the belly. It's just so real. I mean, as stylized as it is, that little roll of fat is just so real. And I think that my compulsion to try to create images of bodies comes out of this feeling that somehow we're being erased all the time. And I just want to put back in those little details that are real and that are kind of who we are. So this image, I have Brandon Fortin of the National Portrait Gallery to thank. She sent me this like 10 years ago. This is a very small portrait called Beauty Revealed, painted on ivory by Sarah Goodridge in 1828, a Boston artist, of her own breast. It's a self-portrait. And she created it for her lover, Daniel Webster, who was a married statesman. So it was a very personal, intimate gift. And I love that she just did a self-portrait of her breasts. And around that time, this tradition of miniature Victorian portraiture there were other ways in which the body was being fragmented. For example, this sort of fad from the late 1700s to the mid 1800s of lovers' eyes, portraits of just the eye that then you could wear around your neck or have in a little box. And it would be of your lover, and nobody would have to know who that person was. So I'm really fascinated with the idea because the main idea we all have of portraiture is one of very much a public presentation. And in these examples, it's much more kind of a private, intimate experience, and the anonymity factor is also important. So this is the first triptych I did. I was a student at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and that was an amazing experience, and I got to study with Scott Knoll and other painters, Sidney Goodman, and sort of got a little bit of the legacy of American painting coming out of Edwin Dickinson and Leonard Anderson there. And I liked the idea of the portraits being sort of next to each other, not alone, in community, in relation to each other, in context. And I was starting, this was 2002, I was starting to really get a sense of what painting means to me, and getting interested in age. The woman in the middle was very, very elderly, and I really just loved the kind of arabesque kind of wrinkles that her breasts made coming down from her breastbone. And then the woman on the end was the mother of a friend of mine, and she had a mastectomy, and then she sat down to pose for me and took her shirt off and told me just to ignore the scar on her belly. And I didn't know what to do. And at first I was just going to do that, but then I said, it's going to be really hard to ignore this. And so then she said, okay, that's fine, you can paint it. And there was a part of me that didn't want to. I thought maybe it's too strange, like people won't believe it. It'll sort of take over, the whole kind of narrative. But I did, and I was so glad. It was like discovering something new, and it was also accepting what is there. And I like to read Rackstraw Downs' writings on painting, and I really relate to his attitude of, I try to just accept what's there. I try not to kind of romanticize it or add something or leave something out. He writes, and I just wrote this down to read to you guys because I really relate. Although he's talking about landscape, I feel this way about bodies. He says, "For me, a site is to explore and to learn from. My initial attitude to it is one of brief duration and gets replaced by what is, I hope, a growing feeling for its subtleties, complexities, contradictions, and incongruities." Other artists I really, really like are Josephine Halverson, Catherine Murphy, and Ellen Altfest. And partly it's because they also are looking at the specificities of things, often in the surfaces of things. So it's the reason why I'm interested in age is partly because it's so much more visually interesting and rich when a body has a history on it. And also I'm just interested in the history of the way older people, and especially older women, have been portrayed in art history and in painting. It's just really interesting to look back and see. When I was traveling in Europe, I was constantly just noticing images of old women and how they were portrayed. And this is a trans woman, Sophia, who modeled and wrote some really interesting things about how we always think that loving yourself means like accepting yourself and not changing yourself. But in her case, loving herself was actually taking these pills and changing her body. And she feels really proud of that. And this is sort of an issue in feminism that has been a lot in the news lately. The Michigan Women's Music Festival is a very kind of iconic lesbian festival. And there's been a boycott of it for the past few years until it finally closed last summer because they don't admit trans women. And so I'm interested in these issues of like how we define ourselves and how we think about gender and the body. So even though I'm focused on the body, I've always been really clear that gender is not tied to the body. So like this image here is from 1994, when I was lucky enough to be at the Michigan Festival for my first time, and they were having a march. Leslie Feinberg and Ricky Wilchins are in the front, and they're marching on the festival to try to raise awareness for the idea of including trans women. And I'm right behind Leslie Feinberg, wearing a baseball cap on backwards, motorcycle boots, and some kind of I don't know. It's like a mini dress that's also a bathing suit or something. But I was 23, and I found this in a book. I didn't even know they'd taken this picture. So I got kind of fed up with Michigan's policy of not admitting trans women. By like 2005, I just stopped going because I was going there specifically to do this project, and it just didn't feel right to not have all these people who have such interesting things to say and share not be part of it. So this is a trans man. This is Stefan, who wrote about how much more comfortable he felt after getting his surgery, his top surgery. So in this way, people often use the experience of portraiture to kind of document a passage or a transformation, and that can definitely happen with transitioning. This is a amazing, huge wooden Buddhist sculpture that is at the RISD Museum, and you can't tell the scale from here, but it's probably about as tall as the ceiling, and it has its own room. And my partner and I went to go see the museum, and I was just really struck by it. And around that time, I had this like sudden revelation that I needed to make the portraits bigger. I just saw them like on a wall big, and I had been not doing this project for about 5 years. And So I started doing, for the first time, larger paintings, as I've been showing you. And they became more abstract because they were larger, and also for me they felt like more invulnerable somehow, kind of taking up space. I was very aware of feeling vulnerable as a woman in public space, and to me this larger size was sort of making a body that kind of couldn't be defiled or destroyed. And this was from a 2011 show at Tabla Rasa Gallery called Radical Acceptance. And this is one of those paintings. So this is the first time I was painting large, and these paintings really took maybe, a couple months to do. Oops. But this is when it starts to feel like a landscape to me. It almost feels like a mountain that I'm trying to climb. And this is Roxanne. Roxanne is a female bodybuilder. I learned so much from her about the world of bodybuilding as a woman. It's really difficult. They don't get as much support, I can tell you that. They don't get as much money. And they have to get breast implants because they lose their breasts, and then people want them to have breasts, so they have to get breast implants. And this is the painting itself. And I started to realize the importance of the jewelry and the necklace as well at this time. And then in about 2012, I think it was, that Ellen Altfest spoke here, and I was sitting right up there. I was really excited. Didn't know that much about her work, but it really was a turning point. She talked about how long her paintings took and how much it is about detail. And I realized I had been sort of discouraged from doing detail by every painting teacher I've ever had. And in grad school, too, I was reading a little bit about the Northern European painting tradition and the way it was regarded. In particular, Svetlana Alpers, this art historian, who pointed out that Northern painting was disparaged for its interest in detail in almost a kind of gendered way. It was sort of associated with the feminine. And Naomi Shore, the sister of the well-known artist and writer Mira Shore, also wrote about detail in relation to aesthetics and the feminine. So I just wanted to read this Michelangelo quote to you guys because it's really funny, I think. He wrote about Flemish painting. He said, "It will appeal to women, especially to the very old and the very young, and also to monks and nuns, and to certain noblemen who have no sense of true harmony. In Flanders, they paint with a view to external exactness or such things. They paint stuffs and masonry, the green grass of the fields, the shadow of trees, and rivers and bridges, which they call landscapes, with many figures on this side and many figures on that. And all this, though it pleases some persons, is done without reason or art, without symmetry or proportion, without skillful choice of boldness, and finally, without substance or vigor." So I was thinking about other artists who really go into detail besides Ellen Altfest, Josephine Halverson, even Via Selmans, and that in a way it's not just about like creating an illusion of the thing. For me, it's about finding another level of information. I really get into examining, where exactly is that mole next to that freckle, and where's the vein, and wanting to really get to the bottom of how is that cluster of wrinkles actually, what is the exact pattern of that. And I'm really inspired by looking at like the surface of an Ellen Altfest gourd, where every little scar, it's not made up, it's not generalized, it's actually every little specific characteristic of that surface. And this is from also that show that happened recently in New Bedford, Massachusetts. I worked on this painting for about 3 years, and it was really a great experience to kind of finally give myself permission to take as long as it takes. Like I'm not a magician, you know, like just because it's not working now doesn't mean it won't ever work. Just give it time, you know. This is a close-up detail. This model had a wonderful necklace on. She was Buddhist, and so she knew a lot about Buddhism, and we had a lot of conversations about Buddhism and jazz, and she ended up moving to Paris, and I'm not in touch with her anymore. She was quite old, but she was deceptively active. Here she is. This is Jace. And now that I'm spending more time with my models, I'm getting a sense of really choosing the models and letting them know ahead of time how long we're going to be working together. And I'm realizing they're starting to have things in common. Like I'm starting to know, oh, that's the type of person. Like recently I met one of my models that I'm currently working with in the bathroom at the doctor's office. She was singing. And she told me she liked my scarf, and I told her I liked her singing, and I just knew she was the type of person who would be able to do this, and she was. And she's just the most fantastic person. And when we had the opening at Trestle Gallery recently, there was all of these models were there, and they had never met before, but they were all the same type of really eccentric, open person, and they were like hugging each other, and it was wonderful. So I really enjoy my time that I spend with the models. And people often, ask, like, why, this is Leonora, why is there no face? I think I would like this a lot better if there was a face. And it's true that when I've had faces in my artwork, it's like a lot easier to sell. We all want humanly to see a face. But for me, if I see a face, that's it. That becomes the important part of the painting. I can't be detached. And I'm really just interested in like the body as a landscape. And I was telling somebody recently, for me, for some reason, to do a face would kind of feel like illustration to me. And to do a body, maybe it's because I've set it up this way over time, but to do the body the way I do it feels like painting to me. Somebody once said that, and I don't even know if this is true, but that Philip Guston, somebody asked him, well, why do you do the ladders, and why do you have these different things in your paintings? And he said, they're just what I need to make a painting. And that's really how I feel. It may be odd, but these are just the things I need to make a painting. The difference between the bodies is exciting to me. So there are differences between the paintings, but in some ways they are somewhat similar to each other, and sometimes people can't remember which is which, or they think they've seen a painting before. And so then I was starting to think recently about, well, why am I so engaged in this one thing? Like sometimes people they give the sense that you should be doing lots of different things, and but if I'm true to myself, this is what I want to be doing. And so then I started thinking, well, what is it about repetition, And I did some reading and thinking about repetition. And Agnes Martin, I was reading the Nancy Princenthal biography of Agnes Martin, which has some really interesting things to say about seriality and minimalism and how she kind of found her thing. And to her, it represented innocence and purity. And she just kept doing that. And then pop art had a different relationship to seriality and repetition with Andy Warhol and commercial kind of repetition. But then in psychology, repetition often has to do with trauma. It has to do with kind of repeating the same thing until you can kind of resolve it. So it's interesting. Like, I think we kind of don't choose really like who we are as artists. It's more a matter of just accepting it over time. So it sort of makes sense to me, I think, really, that there would be this aspect of repetition with what I do. Because the work really is about trauma and healing, both for me and for other people. And also I was thinking, we see these images all the time in our landscape of, pop culture, and they are very repetitive. And, we see images of bodies that are very, very conforming. So it doesn't feel like enough for me to just kind of do this once. And I know paintings function very differently than like advertisements, but there's a way in which I'm hoping that, through like a whole room full of these paintings and through seeing more than one, I'm hoping that people will, something will transform in the way they see the bodies and the way they think about the body as they're looking. And I've been fortunate to learn from a lot of different interesting thinkers over time. And one of them is Diane Radke, who is an art historian who wrote about Paula Modersohn-Becker. And she writes that basically, she writes about the idea of the maternal body and how in art history, basically there's the mother and then there's the sexual nude, but never do they come together because that would be very traumatic. So according to her, and I agree with this, Paula Modersohn-Becker was the first artist to really represent the nude maternal, the maternal nude. And so in some way, I realized that even though I'm interested in sort of gender, ambiguity, and all kinds of different gender expression with my work, I'm also very aware that it is about kind of the repressed feminine. And somebody told me to read some Hal Foster, and I was reading that recently, and he talks about the idea of the repressing of the maternal body underlying the social symbolic order or underlying paternal law. And I definitely have that experience of sort of, often there's this sense that people don't want to see these images, and I'm sort of, certain people just, I'm sort of forcing it upon them. But it is there. It is a certain power that's part of our daily lives. And it's my point of view, it's like my community. And I'm hoping that sort of by this repetition, I can help to kind of transform what people might think of as perverse into something sacred that people can just feel. So I've also started writing about art recently, and just as I've found from curating, writing is also a way that I've been learning a lot. Just basically, I'll choose someone that I want to write about, and then through that process, I end up learning so much. Like, I don't know why I've chosen them at first, but one person I wrote about that was really, really interesting to me was Josephine Halverson. And she said she doesn't think of herself as a painter. She describes her paintings as byproducts of her time spent with her subjects and their environment. And I relate to that. But I also kind of feel like, isn't that what painting is? I mean, painting can be about painting, but so often painting is not about, it's about an experience. Like an authentic experience or a struggle or a love. So it doesn't really matter really what we call ourselves, but I've always talked about this project in this way of like social practice, but in some way, like, why can't it just be painting, Like, painting has always been, portraiture and other things have always been about relationships and about, people's representing people or having them see themselves represented. And perhaps it's been about healing a lot in different ways as well. So this painting here, this is a detail of Janie, and this is the painting that's going to be in the show at the Smithsonian. And I'm so excited that not only did one of these paintings get into the show at the Smithsonian, but it's a big, fat breast portrait. And she's got this necklace on of a red-tailed hawk. And she was just amazing to work with. I love her so much. She's a great friend now. And around the time I was making this painting, I had all these friends and artists and curators and writers, really great thinkers, come into my studio and give me feedback, and I'm so grateful for that. And I think that this painting and a couple of other paintings that I recently finished, like I couldn't have finished without all those people giving me their input. Especially some new friends that, this artist Elizabeth and Sonia, who is very open about spirituality in her work. I was told never to mention spirituality in an artist statement and never to use the word goddess or love. And this is what they told me in art school. And by seeing, Elizabeth, the example of her writing and her artwork, so open about spirituality, it really kind of inspired me to kind of talk about my work also in that way, that I do kind of think of them as goddesses, and the necklaces are sort of like peace offerings or something. So it's funny, it's like I was just thinking, I wanted to kind of let everybody know, like, why do I do this? What's my story? And we all have, our own stories, and we're kind of a mashup of all these different influences in our time. And it's odd, but it's like Lucian Freud, feminist art, lesbian Avengers activism, and, Northern European painting. The other thing I was thinking is my mentor, Carlo, he was actually gay, but he wasn't out his whole life, so he wasn't open about it. But once I came out, he was open about it. So I even think that, like, what I got from him, in some way, it was about kind of this queer expression. And he lived in Waspy, Maine, and he's a Jewish man from New York, and he did all these nudes, and people did not know what to do with it. He often had a lot of censorship issues and things. And so it wasn't until after he died that he started to get kind of recognized by people like Jonathan Katz, the curator who, he did the Hide-Seek show at the Smithsonian. He's focused a lot on gay history in art. And sort of you can really see in his work a real radical kind of just really out there kind of focus on the body and sexuality. And even though he wasn't really out ever in his life, it kind of came out in his work. So I'm also really interested in that. Like, I'm interested in, what is queer, and how that kind of, and obviously the way, the way gay people are in our culture now is very different from how it was 20 years ago. So just to see how that kind of changes, like 20 years ago, or even 10 or 15 years ago, it wouldn't have been so easy for me to actually give an artist talk and say, and I'm a lesbian, I often didn't do that. And there were a lot of things that weren't kind of possible. Like there was this, so I'm feeling like, things have changed so much. People aren't as shocked by what I do. I'm able to be out and open. So that feels really great. It also feels like it's not just accidental, like all of the activism and all of the people that were working for these changes are behind them, So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm open, like I could do something different in the future. I'm totally open to that. And I have. I debated whether I should show other artwork, other bodies of work in this, but ultimately it just doesn't feel right now, because this is what I'm doing now. And it's always kind of come back to me. And I do kind of visualize doing a lot more. Like, painting is so hard, and you just need to do it for so long before you get anywhere. And I just kind of feel like I'm getting somewhere. So, yeah, I've started a few new paintings, and I'm really excited. And I think that's about it. I would love to hear from other people, maybe get some questions. If anybody has any questions, I think there's somebody who's going to moderate the Q&A.
Bravo.